All right. Derek, can you see my screen so that I can test that everyone is seeing it?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, it's visible. Thank you. Thank you for taking us through that session. That was very helpful and insightful, even as I prepare to open this conversation, because today it's actually not a presentation per se. This is a conversation that I'm also curious, as many of you are curious. Karibuni sana, everyone. Again, it's nice to have everyone on. And let's engage and talk about millennials, because this has been a topic that is quite controversial at times, depending on who you're talking to. But for those in my generation, majority of us are convinced that there is a challenge working with millennials. If you ask the millennials, most of them are telling us it's the Gen Zs or it's the Gen X. So we are not the problem. We have accepted our place in whatever quote unquote hell you have placed us. So I'm so interested to hear that. So let me just start with, if you are joining us for the first time, about me. That I am a mom and a wife, and I also someone who values authenticity and enjoy relationships that offer deep human connection. You mute? All right.
You are okay now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So in practice, I am mental health and behavioral therapist, and I also coach well-being. My expertise includes psychotherapy, treatment of substance use, which I have done for many years, and also psychoeducation and training on how complex trauma impacts connection, and that is human connection and well-being of individuals, both in family and organization contexts. I am the founder and clinical director here at CAFRIC International, and my vision and that of this organization is a community where people are aware and actively engaged in creating safe spaces that promote connection and where every single person can maximize their full potential. A bit of my academic and professional journey there, and now to the conversation. This I will not spend a lot of time on because I think you've done such a great job, Derek. So who are millennials? And we've seen from that questionnaire that millennials actually are people born between 1981 and 1996. The other generation that a lot of people think are the millennials actually are the Gen Zs, and these are people born from 1997 onwards. So what's unique about millennials is they are the people born around the same times that websites for use by the general public actually emerged around 1994. And these, the millennials, and the reason that they are a focus today, this is the generation that was old enough at the time to interact with the surge of technology. So Gen Zs, many of them were not born, and even those who are born very closely, they were still quite young. And we are going to see why this is an interesting conversation and to address. So I don't know why many of you are interested in this conversation or what you're hoping for, but just to clear the air, that I and the team here at CAFRIC, we do not think millennials are a problem. That is very, very clear to us. However, we respect your views and opinions. And so the question for me is what or who is the challenge? And I also don't think that I adequately have the answer, but what I am hoping to do is to engage all of us in this conversation so we can review some facts and also engage and share our own experiences. From what evidence is saying, there are actually 4 influencers of millennial attitudes, or what we quote unquote call millennial problems. And one of that is parenting, and then the technology, impatience, and environment. And I will tackle one by one. And towards the end, I would want to hear people's views of how well this resonates with them or it doesn't. Let's start with parenting. And we cannot talk about parenting without looking at the context of parenting, especially in the 21st century, when this generation is growing up, what's happening, who is parenting them, what's happening in the minds, in the hearts, in the homes, in the work environments of the parents that they are growing up with. So what we know and what evidence shows us is that in the 21st century, parenting has had less community focus. There has been more individualistic parenting, which actually ended up losing the social connectedness that is very fundamental for well-being. So most of the parents parenting the millennials, they did not have that community support, that community fabric that usually held generations before them. Millennials are also kind of grew up in a global village, where global village included, the surge of, internet and technology and all of that. So what that meant is that there have been too many teachers, but none of these teachers are reading from the same page. If you are from my generation and before that, you may recall that we used to learn from a very socialized way of learning in community learning, either from parents, grandparents, in schools. We were quite sheltered and limited into the information that was coming to us. So it was pretty much trackable where information was coming from. For millennials, that was not the case. And then it was a time where there has been more fear, kind of with parents. There has been a lot of scary data. This is the time where, especially for us psychologists, the theory of early childhood or adverse childhood experiences was published around 1997. So people started to know about childhood trauma and its effects. There has been a lot of issues around germs and diseases, a lot of negative news on the media around kidnappers, terrorists, and now the most recent coronavirus. So all of these things, they activate survival brain for parents. And they create fear and a sense of mistrust. There has been guilt-based family environment where most of the parents parenting the millennials had to compete between work and family. So those competing demands actually created a sense of guilt for the parent, feeling like, they have to leave their child to be cared for by another person, not spending a lot of time, but at the same time, wanting to provide the best to their child or to their family than they actually experience themselves. So a lot of competing work and family interests. There has been changing family structures. This is actually the first generation to experience a lot of single parenting, related to separation, divorce, grandparents mostly raising children. There has been employed live-in caregivers with this generation more than the previous generations, and also single parent families, blended, and sometimes even same-sex families. This is not so common here in Kenya, but it has in some instances maybe covered in our society because it's not very, very acceptable. But all of those things are things that millennials grew up with. And the other thing is the social democracy, where really life has been like suggestion boxes of whatever you feel is right for you. This was the time where people had the liberty to exercise that. So, hashtags like your voice counts, do you, choose me. And so you can see all of these things that were, competing or kind of taking part at the same time when this generation was growing up. So imagine being a parent. I am sure there are people today joining us who parented during this time. Sure, there are also millennials who are joining us. So this is to start to get some perspective of when we talk about millennials, what exactly is different from millennials and Gen Zs than the rest of the baby boomers and the Gen X and all of those. What was different? And this is what actually has been different. And this is here in the Kenyan context. So what has the millennial experience been? One, we've talked about parenting. So let's look at these parenting challenges that now affect the millennials. One is the issue of undeserved praise. This was the first generation, actually, who started receiving medals for even coming in last. This is perhaps because there was a lot of that guilt coming from parents, but also there was a lot of social democracy wanting to, do good for everyone. So these are people who are praised constantly. So previous generations were used to, your effort is what is rewarded, it's what is praised and commended. We started to see a lot of it even in schools or even in work environments where we are trying to promote collaboration and cohesion by making sure that we are including people. And so they started to feel like you don't have to work so hard to actually be recognized. So this is also the generation that ended up getting what they want when they want it. Why? Most parents are working, most parents have resources, but they're trying to compensate for the time that they're taking away from the family. So what happened is they started to take on this role or ideal-based personas, which is not a real identity, but it's a persona of perfectionism, because they are growing up with working parents who are actually saying, if I grew up in the village and I did not go to this and this school, then because you're going into these schools and I'm putting in so much effort, I also want to see results. So an element of perfectionism, a lot of filtering and pleasant parts of themselves or their lives to kind of appear perfect. And this actually led to a bit of low self-esteem. And with low self-esteem, what we see has happened is a lot of them has kind of fostered these pride-based counter-identifications where on the inside, the real self does not feel very courageous, does not feel very good. So what happens is now we have the internet. Now we are in the public. Now we cannot just exist in our little village. Everybody knows about it. Now we go to schools that are far and wide international, that we are interacting with people who different, who sound different, who have different experiences and expectations and cultures and values. And so we have to project the persona that is acceptable. And so that leads to low confidence. So what is surprising is that in the work environment, we actually tell them, my door is open. Come in, let me know how you're struggling. And this is sometimes is an assumption that they actually have the confidence coming through that door and tell us how they're struggling. So I want people to be thinking through this. A bit of what I'm talking about when I say pride-based counter-identifications, this is a diagrammatic kind of representation of that. On my left, which is perhaps your right, on the screen, you'll see those three ovals, that the innermost one is the real self, then the role self, and the ideal self. What this shows is that all of us are born with that authentic kind of hunger to just be seen, to be heard, and to actually be understood and accepted. Fortunately for millennials, unlike the previous generations, that depended on not just mom and dad and grandmother and the neighbor or the pastor or whoever that were in our environment when we're growing up. For millennials, we are growing up with a much larger society, much larger frame of judgment, of opinions, and all of that. Remember that global village. So what happens, it is not very possible for the real self to fit into that. And so from a very young age, these creating roles that fit what the society expectation is. And further to the role now, we also see ideals of, what an ideal, woman looks like. Things like body image started to come with this generation, where the ideal, now I can use, for example, an ideal woman is a woman who looks a certain way, an ideal, wife, an ideal child, an ideal family home based on your income and all of that. So there has been a lot of idealism that is born from the fact that now they're growing up, they're working, and they are existing in this global village. What happens is when we create these roles and ideals, they actually shrink the real self. And that is where the low self-esteem comes from. When the real self is surrounded by roles or masks of this idealism, we actually don't feel that sense of expansion and growth to actually speak our voice and speak our mind and authentically. So what's been happening when that is shrinking, they continue to create more roles and more ideals around themselves. And those are the ones most of the time that we are seeing in the workplaces. So it's not the real millennial. We are most of us interacting with the roles and the ideals that they actually have created based on that. And it's not just them. Many of us also continue to do that, depending, regardless of the generation we come from. And we'll see why. The other influencer of millennial attitudes, I say, is technology. And this is a big one. And this is why. The technology challenge actually it's on its ability to trigger or to release dopamine. Dopamine, for most of you, you may be aware that it's the neurotransmitter or the chemical in our brain that is released for pleasure, that gives us pleasure. You know, when you eat a nice piece of cake, when you see someone you haven't seen that you love and care for a very long time, that when we take alcohol or drugs, the same chemical that is released that makes us want more and more of that experience. So that dopamine actually is the root of all addiction for substances that we've seen. So what has happened is you can imagine that we've had age restrictions for things like alcohol, drugs, and all of that. We have no age restrictions on technology, social media, and cell phones. Where is the age restrictions? What's the policy? What's been, restricted on that? And the other challenge with that now, there is no age restrictions. Everybody has a cell phone. They have access to social media. But guess what? They are also, most of them, living in concrete jungles. Most of the generations before, we grew up in open fields, in farms, in places where we could go from 7 in the morning, come back in 9 in the night. So now a lot of them are growing inside in concrete jungles. When I look out the window, all I see is another apartment. It's another home. It's another roof of a home, not even the inside. So what's happening is that this has limited the ability to foster human connections. And so they have not much human connection. Then they have social media and cell phones. So that's what. Instead of turning to a human being to say, I need help, I am struggling, and this and that, they just turn to social media. They look for answers there. They Google everything. Now we have ChatGPT, we have here. So all of these things are competing with the connections that millennials actually can form and interfering with it. So they, remember, are already predisposed and vulnerable to stress and feel more insecure than previous generations. Not because of their fault, not because they are weaker, it's just because of the context and the time they were born and what was going on. So they actually overcompensate now with technology, because if there is anything that makes one feel good, is the dopamine that is released, whether one is drinking or whether one spends hours on social media doing whatever they are doing. So what happens wherever there is no human connection, there is really no real joy. So they, a lot of them say everything is fine. And we question that. And sometimes they say, you're lying. That's not true. They say they are fine, but if you look at them, they're really not fine. My question to you, what else do they know? That's the life they've known. So obviously everything is fine to them. I have my, cell phone, I have social media, I have Wi-Fi now, I can tap, I can whatever. So everything is okay. But it's us now, the previous generations who are not used to that are finding that very, very strange. So unfortunately, this for them leads to a lot of no fulfillment, always feeling like there's always something big out there, better, comparing themselves with others. You can imagine how this is complicating self-esteem, because everyone's life is out there in the public. And what happens, parents have been geniuses of filtering things. So out of what is coming out actually on social media or in this website, it's a filtered life. It's a role or ideal self. It's not a real representation of the life of that person. And so when they're comparing themselves with that, they're comparing themselves with what? With something that's not real, that's just an idealism of something. So it's very important to start to understand this so that we can actually generate a level of patience when we are working with them. Influencer number 3 is impatience. And this is why impatience is a challenge as well. Many of us, and to, apologies to any millennial who could be joining, I know we have some, impatience has been accused to be entitlement. And we say, they're so entitled, but really entitled. And let's see. This generation grew up in a time of instant gratification. They were the first generation to actually have a TV that is not going off at a certain time, that has multiple channels. You can flip. If you're not happy with NTV, you go to KTN, you go to what? This is the first generation to have that. So whenever they need it, it's there. You know, shows, you don't even have to wait for the show time to watch the show. You can just save it and binge watch it just one day. You know, online shopping, you need something, we used to travel and take a matatu and bus and whatever to go find and look, and sometimes you wouldn't even find. For them, online shopping, Jumia, options are there. You want to talk to someone, not a problem. You don't feel like talking, voicemail, you know, send them a text, Snapchat, any or of those things. And then even dating, you know, the most intimate and one that fosters such human connection. Insights also has come up in this generation, where, you know, you don't like someone, tonight you can just choose another person on the internet. So you can see all the things that have been, so that instant gratification that actually does not have to be work to actually find what one wants. This is what has influenced the attitude. So why do I have to work so hard when everything is, or leave alone that, how did I learn what hard work? Where? They've not had the opportunity to, and it's not their fault again. They've been given these things. They apply this instant gratification model to life, unfortunately, that they want everything instantaneously. I want to have a family one time, and I want to have a house for them and all of that, but I want it now, you know, and I just graduated, I want it now. So they have this, now that leads to this hunter versus farmer mindset, that they actually are looking for opportunities to get there very, very fast. And it is easy for them to engage in that because their mind works so fast. Everything has always been an instant gratification when it comes to pursuit of what they want. So the hunter mentality, unfortunately, will keep them, you know, if I'm not happy, I'm thinking something else is coming, this is bigger, this is better, this pays more, and all of that. This is a better looking man, a better looking woman. So really fulfillment is being impacted. They hop from job to job, relationship to relationship, looking for the one. The challenge that I find is that most millennials sometimes don't realize that you have to create the one. The one that you are looking for sometimes needs to be created through farming, through putting hard work, through testing and failing and trying again. That is a skill, unfortunately, that a lot of millennials, unless is a privileged millennial, and privilege means that they had parents who understood that and they had a society that supported it. Unless one was privileged like that to grow up in this generation, its life can be very, very, very difficult. And the influencer number 4 is the environment. The challenge with the environment, and when I talk about the environment, is the environment that we're having in the workplaces, because this conversation is around working with millennials in the workplaces. The environment is usually the culture in the organizations. Majority of the organizations, actually, even today, it still prioritize shareholder value over the human experience. And we give it to them. Yes, a lot of them are for-profit organizations, and you know, investors have to be sure that they are return on investments. Unfortunately, the same mindset is costing organizations, but most importantly, it's really impacting the experience of millennials. What happened when they go into organizations that the goal is the bottom line, that there's less emphasis on human experience, their mind is constantly on survival mode. And we know on survival mode, there's no sense of safety. So I come here at Catholic Center, and the goal here is numbers, numbers, numbers. I have to prove through numbers what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and you know, what are my KPIs and all. So all of that information puts them on this survival brain, which is always afraid, which is always looking out for threat. When one is always looking for threat, combine that with now micromanaging that happens in organizations like those, because the managers are afraid not meeting targets. The managers are micromanaging now a generation of millennials to actually those are the numbers. And the millennials are already on survival mode. They have no sense of safety. They are working afraid to make mistakes. Unfortunately, they make more mistakes. They were working with the biggest threat, which is actually failure. Failure is the biggest threat. Why? Because every time I leave this office, or even in this office, when I look at myself versus my colleague Derek, something is not right. And it's not just, it's not right that everybody else that I'm going to meet around who will know that Irene and Derek work together, they are going to compare, oh, Derek drives this car, Derek lives here, you know. Derek is already married, Derek has his children, Derek's children go to this school. So there's a lot of that failure becomes such and the biggest threat for millennials. And so in this environment, what we've been seeing is mass layoffs. Why? Because of underperformance and all of that. Most importantly, it's because millennials can't just cope with the micromanaging at the same time, well, on this survival mode. So this triggers survival brain more. And so what I see the challenge is we have already take an already insecure generation and put them in environments that do not care about them as human beings. When that happens, we're going to complain about millennials, and millennials are going to hop from one job to another one. Millennials are going to be, time bomb anytime because the pressure is just too much. It is everywhere. So why do us? I say us because I'm in this generation of before millennials who find it hard sometimes to work with millennials. And for me, in my own analysis, because I work mostly with millennials as part of my team, and to many of people that are my business partners and friends, what I see is what is happening is once in our generations, we were actually shamed or punished for showing emotions. So what we learned is actually to suppress our authentic feelings, and instead we express, and instead of expressing healthy anger, we suppress it and then act it out. So for example, you observe someone who is a member of your staff struggling, but instead of bringing it up on time, instead of saying something, instead of trying to find a solution, we don't know how to communicate discomfort. And so we suppress it, but guess what? One time it just, and that's it. You have no work here anymore. That's it. I can't take, I can't stand this attitude, and it doesn't win for anyone. The other thing is we did not receive a lot of support in terms of emotional support or even sometimes instrumental support, basic things. Many people had to work, find their pen, find their book and all of that. So we learned to be independent at a very young age. The problem with this is that we compare that with what we see with millennials who are in most cases our children. We want the same mindset that we have of grinding, of being independent, but you not grow up in the same environment, in the same context. So as we don't ask for help, we don't even know sometimes how to support others. And we also have set very high and realistic expectations of ourselves and others. What happens now, we do the same to these millennials who come from a very vulnerable background, who are already on survival mode, who are trying to survive in this global village of judgment, of publicity, and everything. And we set these unrealistic expectations, and that just becomes a time bomb. The other part is we were betrayed by those we trusted, most of us. So what actually happens is we learned it is safer to not trust others. Many of us, we were taught, family business is family business, you keep it at home. A lot of abuse was happening in those homes. So because of that, we really have a hard time trusting without other people's intentions. And so what happens, even when we are working with people with good intentions, who sometimes just have a different opinion, take it very personally. And that opinion becomes now the trigger for us to say, this person is not working with me, they are pulling the carpet and all of that. So a lot of the time, it is what's happening. What is in our cup is what is spilling out. And the last one is our needs often were not prioritized. And so what happens is we learn to manipulate others to meet our needs through control tactics. Either learn to lie to get our needs met, withhold, and withholding is just not saying exactly what we mean. There's that authenticity, intimidation. And so what happens is a lot of us actually observe someone, maybe, a younger generation struggling because of all of this, again, the judgments and all the stereotypes that we have around millennials. We don't intervene on time because it's just big behavior, it's bad choices, they're just lazy, they're all of that. So because of that, by the time that actually we could have done something to rescue someone or a situation or even save our work environment, we are not able to do that. So power becomes and control tactics and intimidation. Whilst we are doing that, the pain is the millennials, and especially now the generation after millennials, the Gen Zs, they are pushing back. And the generations before that, we do not like it. It is painful. The pushback is very painful. And I want to share this quote by Simon Sinek that says, great leaders are not responsible for the job. They are responsible for the people responsible for the job. And what does that mean? That as leaders, as employers, as people working with millennials, the most important thing to recognize is that our responsibility, number one, is the people who are responsible for the work that we want done and that we are hoping to do. And real leadership is not being in charge, but taking care of those in our charge. That is what real leadership is. So this pain will end if we can all recognize that, if we can all take a step back and ask ourselves, what is in my car? What do I bring when I come into this environment? What stereotypes am I carrying? What traumas am I carrying? So what is needed? What we actually need to be able to work with millennials is empathy and perspective. I have already given perspective. Our empathy will come from understanding and being able to transition from just prioritizing shareholder value in organizations, in our companies, to include also promoting emotional safety in that work environment. That when we recognize that our work is to help the people who are responsible for giving us the bottom lines that we want. When we can do that, then it's a win-win. We also need to learn with humility to give up micromanaging. Whether this millennial is in your organization, is your colleague, your staff, or even in your house as your son or your daughter. Micromanaging does not work with millennials. Intimidation does not influence positive behavior. Inspiration does. And what is inspiration? Inspiration is when we can model safety to them. They actually model it back. This generation is the most generous when it comes to taking care and feedback of emotions for other people. They become very, very uncomfortable when the environment is not safe to do that. They are avoidant, they will shut down. But when that is fostered, they actually mirror it. So we need to recognize that. And the third one is trust, trust, trust. That no one is up to catch you. No one is up to ruin your life. No one is up to do bad. People will make mistakes. It does not mean they're bad. People will make bad choices. It does not mean they're bad. People will sometimes leave good environments and situations. It doesn't mean that they're bad or they hate you. So what happens when we don't have trust? We are not able to share our vision of the organizations, of what we envision with this generation. And remember, these are the people who have information on their fingertips. So when we don't share the vision, so you're working with people telling them we are going this way, but there's no way. The way is in your head. And so when they come this way, you tell them, we were supposed to go this way. I couldn't see the road. So I just, started to pave my way. So support the team to join in their vision. Support these people to share in your vision, to join in because they also are at an advantage in the fact that information is in their fingertip and they are quick with technology. Take care of your individual and team well-being as well. Again, I said, what is in your cup? Because whatever is in your cup is what is going to spill out in your workplaces, in your family, whoever and wherever you're interacting, whether it's a millennial or it's a Gen Z, whatever is in your cup will be triggered. Whenever you're shaken or someone trips on you, it is going to spill out and we will see it. So take care of whatever goes into your cup by making sure you are promoting your own individual well-being, but most importantly, also the well-being of that team. And as a leader, I think we do have a responsibility to do that, because if we want results, we have to ensure that the people responsible to give us the results, they actually feel confident and supported to do that. This is a very wonderful quote that I love from Gabor Mate. It says, safety is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of connection. Work is going to be hard. Economies are going to be shaky like the one we are sitting in right now. There's going to be a lot of ambiguous, unknown, and threatening experiences that we go through. But guess what? That does not mean there's no safety. Whenever there is connection, safety exists amidst all of that. And Gabor Mate is a genius trauma specialist that I cannot agree more with this quote from him. The good news for everyone is that at CAFRIC, we are here to support. We understand this. We have this perspective. We also look at evidence and see what is there. And we have training programs that are designed to help people increase self-awareness and emotional intelligence, to be able to set healthy boundaries and gain authority and responsibility. It is important to say, even as we gain this perspective, then perspective is good if you just gain the perspective without the understanding of setting healthy boundaries for yourself and for whoever else you're working with. We are also going to see places where now we are crossing boundaries between, authority, crossing boundaries of responsibility, crossing boundaries of respect, and that is not good either. So what we need is to be able to gain that level of emotional self-awareness that will help us set healthy boundaries. And this promotes individual growth and shuts the brain from surviving, promotes thriving. When that happens, connection increases, and definitely we see bottom lines soar as well. The part for this is one on the level of accessibility that we make our work. We deliver interventions both here at the center in Vika, where I'm speaking from, but also wherever people live, learn, work, worship, socialize. We are able to do that through either in-person or virtual sessions. Our programs are very affordable because we provide group training, which leverages on cost versus the individual therapy, which tends to be very, very expensive. And in most cases where we do have actual treatment, we also have NHIF and listed by most insurances. We are also a one-stop shop, meaning we provide mental and emotional well-being, the whole scope. We are one-stop shop. So whether it's inpatient treatment that is required, whether it's just training, whether it's speaking to families, to churches, we are available and we're able to do that. In most cases, especially in religious organizations, we are also able to offer pro bono talks to just create that awareness. We have lifetime follow-up of all our inpatient treatment work that we do here at CAFRIC. We have we're extending this gift still to people working in organizations and experiencing these challenges. What we actually do is we come into the organization and scope the needs of the organization through assessments. We do have risk assessments that are evidence-based. We conduct, they're anonymous. We don't need to know who is answering what, but very fast they are able to help us see the picture of how safe the team is feeling. And from that, then we design interventions. We are offering free workplace assessments to organizations. And because we cannot be everywhere, we are limited to every webinar to 5 organizations. That's it. Thank you to many of you who have already taken advantage of this. It's been such a pleasure to be able to meet the teams. Usually it's valued at 75,000, but we are offering this so that people can get a taste of actually what happens. Another quote from psychologist Carl Jung: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Yes, until we become aware, we'll keep pointing fingers. The millennials, the Gen Zs, no, it's not us, it's the baby boomers, it's the Generation X and all of that. We'll keep pointing fingers until we gain this consciousness, we gain this understanding and perspective, actually foster empathy. Then connection doesn't happen. If you are an individual who feels, by the way, now that you talk about parenting, I can see myself, I see how I struggle and all of that. For individuals, we do have this program. It's called Thrive, and it is offered by Catholic Center. I facilitate this program. It's an 8-week virtual program. This is a program that will benefit you if you're a parent to be able to balance authority and nurturance. It's also for leaders who want to promote team engagement and productivity, for couples who want to foster connection and trust in relationships, and for individuals who want to increase self-awareness and emotional intelligence and to be able to set healthy boundaries and actually stop self-sabotage. There is a lot of self-sabotage that we engage in our own lives that hinders flourishing and thriving just unknowingly. We were raised and we found people doing that and we continue to do that. And one of those is, for example, not being able to express emotions, not being able to say authentically, no, I do not agree with that. This is how I feel. How many of us feel confident, especially in issues, family context, to be able to say that? Of course, the fear of being the odd one, the fear of being the one who raises a concern, and all of these are tied up around the shame that is in our society. So this program is starting next week, September 5. It's 8 weeks up to October 31st. It's 7 to 8 to 9 p.m. The cost for this is, again, 50% discount. We are offering this at 15,000. Registration link is available. You will be able to get that on our contacts that I'll share. These are the other services that we provide. For those who joined a bit earlier, you're able to hear a bit about this. So we treat also all mental ill health conditions, rehabilitate substance use. We provide consultations, drug and urine testing, and we process trauma and grief here as well. This is just our space where I'm speaking from, and these are our contacts for any of you who would want to follow up or register for the free workplace assessment through that Drive program. Anyone is welcome. So thank you. I will ask Derek if you could stop the recording so we can give people the freedom to ask questions.